So we will hereby call this meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Urbana Free Library for January 9th, 2024 to order. It's our first meeting of the year, and Celeste did not let us slack. We have a full agenda. All right. Becky, you want to do the roll call?
Sure. Liz? Here. Glenn?
Here.
Erica? Here. Beth?
Here.
Dan?
Here.
Rob?
Here.
And Brandon?
Here.
Okay, here, okay. So we're missing Mark and Charisse.
All right. Any additions, corrections, or modifications to the agenda?
I would like to move that the spelling of my name be corrected in the agenda.
Oh, no.
That was me. And spell check.
Spell check.
Autocorrect.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. We will correct Glenn's name.
First and last.
Whoa.
Jeez.
Thank you, Glenn. All right. With that modification in place, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Agenda is approved. Do we have any public comment tonight? No? Then we shall get right to our presentations, and first and foremost, we have Riley for our library audit.
First of all, can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to do a quick sound check first. Perfect, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads.
We can hear you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Am I presented up on a screen somewhere in the main area so I can share my screen? Is that okay with the audit reports and stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you can check and answer that too. Good. Well, first of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Riley Martin. I'm an audit manager with Library in Haven. This is my second year on the library's audit and with the city as well. So I'm pretty familiar with how things kind of work at the library. I'm very familiar with working with Celeste and with Becky. And I want to say that the audit is a two-team game, is probably what to call it. We can't, go through the steps of issuing our audit without their help. So they were a huge instrumental piece of getting the audit finalized and issued and submitted to the state authorities within the timely manner of 6 months. So thank you to both of them for their incredible help this audit year. So we definitely appreciate that. With that being said, I'll jump right in here. Let me share my screen. Oh, it says disable. That's okay. We'll roll with it. It's fine. The first document we issue as part of our audit package is the one.
We can get you added on there for that.
You're okay. We can call them audible. It's all good.
Okay, well, I can figure out how to make you co-host, but this is,
If not, no worries. We're all good.
okay, you know what? Yep, I'm going to break it.
No worries. Not for sure. You'll be all right.
More people with more expertise than me. I'm not used to seeing Zoom and that.
Document that we issue as part of our audit package is one that does not have the cover to it. It's just our Auditing Standards 114 or SAS 114 letter for short. It starts with, we have audited the financial statements, and it has some stuff about significant audit findings and whatnot. I'll kind of touch briefly on what this document is. Basically, it summarizes the responsibilities of us as the audit firm, as well as Celeste and Becky as management for the library. Their responsibility is to compile and prepare the financial statements, and our sole job is just to give an opinion on it. We talk about the use of appropriate accounting policies. That starts in the first paragraph under significant audit findings. So those accounting estimates could be the use of depreciation expense estimates, so useful lives and whatnot. We also break in and talk about the idea or the OPEB liability, which is based on the actuarial evaluation that's taken each year.
Riley, you should be able to share now if you want to. Sorry for interrupting.
Good. That's okay. No, I'll give it a quick shot. Let's see. Oh, I see. Yeah, let's find out. I'll bring this down here. All right. It helps sometimes if you can see. Let's see here. So I'm right down here. So this is where I'm jumping down to. So we also cover and talk about the if we had any difficulties or disagreements with management throughout the course of our audit, which there weren't. And like I said, Celeste and Becky were a huge help. So anything that we needed, they were very timely with getting us those items. And any questions we had, they were more than welcome to come to them for questions, and they were providing us answers very thoroughly and very timely. So we definitely appreciate them, like I said. Now is for the meat and potatoes as to why I'm here. The big bound copy that's in front of you is our Urbana Free Library Annual Financial Report. I'll turn your attention here to page 1, which is our independent auditor's report. Kind of similar, it mimics a lot of the similar verbiage that was covered in that first letter. It talks about what our responsibilities are as the auditors, and then along with Celeste and Becky's responsibilities as management. I'll turn your attention here to the second paragraph under the opinion section, and I'll kind of paraphrase here. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects as of June 30th, 2023. We call this an unmodified opinion in the governmental accounting and auditing world, which is the cleanest form of opinion you can have. That means there were no material misstatements or any material omissions that could make the financial statements be materially misstated. In our opinion, it also covers verbiage about the internal control environment, and so not only were the financial statements presented fairly, but also that there was a sound internal control operating environment. So the way that things should be working are working properly and working smoothly like a well-oiled machine. So the next thing I'll turn your attention to starts on page 4. If I could give you any, for any of you who have New Year's resolutions to read more, I mean, it is a library board meeting, so if I could point your attention to one thing, it would be the management's discussion and analysis. I can, attest and say that the financial statements towards the back of the report are not always the most enjoyable thing to read. It can get quite dry very quickly. So if you want a quick highlight of what was covered throughout the back of the report, this is your place to go. So the MD&A runs from pages 4 to 11. It covers some analytics, some conclusions, some helpful charts and graphs that kind of walks you through just some financial oversights and some highlights that that are covered in the back of the report here. If you do want to take a stab and look at the back of the report and see how everything's broken out, I'll turn your attention to page 17. Page 17 is your balance sheet for all of your governmental funds. So you can see here we have our general operating fund and our special revenue trust fund. So it breaks out your asset, your liabilities, and your fund balance at the end of the year. The next thing I'll turn your attention to is page 19, which is your statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. In layman's terms, it's just your income statement. So it breaks down your revenues and your expenditures. And you can see here that your general fund brought in just over $330,000 worth of revenue this year, or sorry, I shouldn't say revenue, but net revenue, net income, to bring your ending fund balance just shy of $3.5 million. And then finally, the last document that we always issue as part of our audit package is our management letter comments. I want to preface that these are not a slap on the hand, not us saying like there are things that are not running properly at the library. These are more so best practices that we see in the governmental accounting sector. A lot of what's being covered in these management letter comments is a lot of just new and upcoming GASB pronouncements. So things that we're required to make sure that we're picking up and including in the report if they're applicable. I'll zoom in here a little bit. Like I said, most of the ones that were issued this year so the current recommendations are those that are going to be applicable in either next fiscal year or else 2 fiscal years from now. Since GASB has released these, we are required to go ahead and include them in our report. It is very possible they may not be applicable, but for transparency purposes, we have to include them. So if there's anything here that would be required under GASB statement number 100 or GASB statement number 101, and it's applicable for the library will make sure that we're working with Celeste and Becky and picking up those as needed. We do cover a couple of our prior recommendations. So this year we were required to implement GASB statement number 96, which required the long-term recognition of any subscription-based IT arrangements. And you can see here the stats at the bottom. As the library has no material SPDOs, that just is the acronym for it. There is no impact on the financial statements. I do want to mention that this is a rolling statement, so if the library were to enter into any long-term IT arrangements in the future, it works retroactively or proactively that we go back and update it as needed. And then the last two we had notes on, which is the capital asset policy and the fund balance policy. And I like to chalk this one up to changing audit firms. I know that Baker Tilly had audited the city and the library for the last few years before, I think, 2022. When a new firm comes in, there's usually more improvements that we find that we always recommend. So this is one that I've been working with Celeste and Becky, and we'll make sure that we'll get it rolling for the next couple of fiscal years. So that is all I have to present on tonight. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer whatever you have. If nothing jumps to your mind right now and you want to shoot me an email, feel free to kind of go through Celeste or Becky. They have my email, and we've chit-chatted back and forth quite a bit. So if you have any questions, feel free to open the floor. Otherwise, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to present tonight. I don't know if you guys have gotten a ton of snow down in Urbana, but we've been absolutely hammered with the bad weather today up in April. So I'm very appreciative that you allowed me to present remotely tonight. So I definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, Riley. Any comments or questions from the board?
That was really straightforward.
Awesome.
I did have one that was mentioned in there. There was a comment regarding that carryover balance was needed in order to fund the library each year, that basically our amount of annual revenue wasn't covering it. So that made me, is there an amount that is being carried over that we're steadily dwindling, or?
So what it is that the library gets 2 sets of property tax checks, basically, two big chunks. So our fiscal year is July through June. We get the first check in September. We get the second check in June, which means if we don't have money in our fund balance to pay for the year, when the check comes in June, we could have been broke.
Right.
So that is why, when you look at June 30, the fund balance looks so lush.
So that's just an artifact of how we receive that balance. It's
Yes.
not, got it.
We're not in trouble, it's a matter, but we need to, this is the questions the city council sometimes has. Why do you have so much money in your fund balance? What the heck? And the answer is, because it's what gets us through the end of the year,
Yeah.
having basically 6 months to make sure we can pay for that. And sometimes that check comes late. So we definitely want to have at least 6 months right there.
Yep. Appreciate it. Hearing nothing else? All right. Thank you again, Riley. Appreciate the overview.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. That will bring us to the next item on there is our other guest here in the background, Joe from Engberg and Anderson, is going to tell us a little bit about the building plan. Oh, you're muted there, Joe.
And do we need to make him a co-host also?
Yes.
Yes.
You need to show,
Joe, do you want to be able to share your screen?
If we could.
Okay.
Sorry.
okay, Rob was able to figure it out.
If you mouse
Over
his-
on the far right
yeah,
by his
mouse
name.
over his name on the participants list.
Oh, I was looking at the screen.
I know, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
The 3 dots.
Then hit the 3 dots and choose
Yeah.
make co-host.
Yahtzee.
Sure do. There it is. Okay. Looks great.
All right. And everyone can hear me fine?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much for this opportunity as well. My head is soaked because I too am shoveling out from a lot of heavy wet stuff.
Yeah,
Very
everybody gets
unpleasant
us.
start to the winter. Want to talk a little bit about the firm first. This is the first time we've had a chance to meet and talk. I want to give you a sense of Engberg Anderson's experience. We are first and foremost an architectural practice, building design, interior design, and we do a lot of planning. Most of that planning is in the library world. I do want to acknowledge that planning from an architectural point of view is a little bit different than planning from a consulting librarian's point of view. And as we walk through the process that the library has embarked on, I will point out that this is a collaboration between the library. One of your former directors, Fred Schlipp, was put a lot of work into a number of drafts of this program from that consulting librarian point of view and Engberg Anderson. Most of our practice has been focused on thinking about the future of libraries and how they engage their communities. So the experience, I think, is relevant, especially in the nature of thinking about an Urbana-specific program of spaces. It's easy to start to think about libraries being the same, and in fact, the spaces that comprise a physical library need to be tailored pretty directly to the services that you want to offer to your community. And in fact, those services are likely tailored to specific needs. And so when we think about our practice, we want to be as holistic as possible and address all of the needs that come into play in owning, operating, maintaining, and presenting a facility to the public that allows you to provide the types of services that they find relevant and useful each and every day. One of the key components within this is that planning group of services, and this specifically building programs exercise is one of the key components that just about everything else rests on. So as you contemplate this draft, I would encourage you to be as detailed and as thorough and as challenging as you can in evaluating each of the underlying premises, because each of the subsequent steps that might lead to an improved or enlarged facility are really based on the conclusions framed by this program document. You because of that, it's important to remember to start with the people rather than the spaces that are going to be designed at some point to serve them. As I mentioned, it's more about people than needs, than services, than specific uses of the spaces before you get to the design of the space. So we're really trying to anticipate all of those relationships in this very detailed list of project requirements that are set out here for your evaluation and hopefully ultimately for an architect to use to design and then construct a building. So we want to start with those user needs. We want to identify specific space requirements that are needed for you to deliver service that will meet those needs. And then we want to take a further step, and I think this is where our involvement along with Fred has some added value. Planning around an existing building really complicates the quantification process of defining an overall space need. Most library programs are built around assumptions of standard unit sizes for offices, for shelving, for seats, and for all of the spaces that go in between those typical components and knit those spaces into a unified building. When you're working with a building that's a series of additions, one of which is of significant vintage, arranged on a site that slopes, and designed around a series of levels that step down a site, all of those assumptions really start to be skewed, and some of the underlying strategies for developing overall size don't really apply as directly as one would hope. And so the process really tried to make more of an informed decision as to the relative efficiencies that were obtainable and translate the space need into something that was both pragmatic and visionary while acknowledging the real world constraints of living with legacy structure. First and foremost, though, this did start with an analysis of the types of spaces that are in the building and, more importantly, missing from the building. There's a couple of sections in the program that highlight the attributes that are really charming about the facility, and then quickly we get into some of the challenges. After all, this is a statement about the challenges that need to be overcome to enable you to support service within the community more effectively. And so it's hard to escape the fact that much of the building has a number of services packed into space that is essentially inadequate for the amount of material and the numbers of people that you want to accommodate. This packed nature really has an impact on how well people utilize space. You can imagine that if there's too many conflicts with people in aisles, if you feel too packed together when you're in a seat and there's someone next to you or walking by you, there's insufficient space for you, a computer, and whatever other materials you're using to engage in research, that it really limits your desire to stay or come back and engage the services as frequently or as in-depth as you might like. And those kinds of challenges are evident throughout the building, whether it's in the public spaces or in the staff zone. There's just a significant number of legacy challenges that were developed over time, all of which made sense at the time they were developed, but now have come together to become more of an accretion of inefficient spaces. I mentioned a little bit the building geometry. The overall length of the building and its ratio to the width of the building really promote a significant amount of connective space needed to get from one end to the other. And because the building is arranged on multiple levels, the need for stairs and ramps and elevators is more substantial than in a number of buildings of similar size. You're getting to the size where some of that is going to be needed no matter what the configuration. But because the building is so long and so narrow, there's an excessive amount of space dedicated to those kinds of uses compared to a typical situation. All of that adds up to challenges for accessibility. One of the primary evaluations of the building's condition related to the number of stairs, the frequency with which they're encountered, the location and distance to elevators, the limited accessibility that those elevators offer to different levels. And there are ways to adjust this before adding another elevator. And I'm sure you're aware of some of those. And then the ramps within the building. In terms of the quality of space, there's things like natural light that really play into people's satisfaction with their experience experience in the building. The overall floor-to-floor height is a challenge both for natural light and artificial light. And it also adds to a claustrophobic effect, which can impact some people's ability to utilize the space. And then there are underlying deficiencies in the capabilities of the building systems. As you're all aware, library service, like many other components of modern civilization, are more and more power dependent. And the distribution of both power and data, artificial and natural light, are challenges. Some of that is just the raw distribution capacity. Some of that is the floor-to-floor height. And then some of it is the specialized nature of some of the collections. And in particular, we're thinking about the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems at the archives. That's true of the archival collections in the building and in adjacent facilities. So it's a pretty long list of needs that the program attempts to address, some of which are definitely quantity-based and some of which are quality. And for the most part, they come together in a number of the key spaces within the building. I do want to point out that this litany of challenges and the underlying approaches to addressing them went through a number of iterations with staff over a number of years. And this really has been honed from what might be possible to everything we can imagine to a really focused set of needs that aren't very tolerant wish list items. We've tried to distill this to the essence of what library service in the community really needs to be the expressed desires of the community. At that point, to make it more manageable, the program is broken into a series of space typologies. I think you'll recognize most of these. In a contemporary library, there's a little bit more overlap between these types of spaces than this diagram would suggest, but these offer a framework that help us focus on essential aspects and then discuss some of the overlaps between types of space use. The reader seats, technology seats, activity seats is a good example. That more and more people are bringing their own devices into the building, and so the distinction between what is a seat only for reading versus a seat that might support reading, use of a tablet, laptop, or other type of engagement, interpersonal connection, is much more blurred. But the important part is that there's enough seats in enough different types of environments that support a really wide range of uses in the facility to meet the underlying needs of the community. The program then really tries to walk through each of these and think about the evolution of library service and how the building either supports or challenges you in your efforts to incorporate these emerging strategies. The collection remains one of the most significant resources that you make available to the community, and access to a physical collection is one of the challenges within the building. Because of its size, a lot of the collection is packed in pretty tightly, and the ability of the public to come into the building and engage the collection in a browser-friendly way is challenged. Ideally, and this is part of the program, the aisles would be wider, there'd be more face-out display, there'd be opportunities to see through the book stacks and get a sense of what's going on in the next aisle, all of which really entices people to spend time evaluating the collection in a way that's a little bit more intuitive than using a catalog. There's a number of users in your building who are more comfortable using the building in an introverted way and accessing the collection without stopping and asking at Reader's Advisory. And so presenting the collection in ways that support that type of independent use is a good way to improve the utilization of the collection. The other thing that's a big user of space in the building is a strategy called Marketplace, where portions of the collection are brought out of the higher density collection zones and put into a curated display that helps introduce parts of the collection that may be off the new books list and present them to the community in ways that offer them an opportunity to explore parts of the collection that they might not be aware of otherwise. This is much more of a face-out, browser-friendly, wider aisles, lower stack approach. It does take up a little bit of space, but it really drives utilization numbers significantly. That includes a significant amount of space to help with that kind of an approach, both at the entry level and at entry points into secondary collections throughout the building. The next major component is to think about places for people to just sit and engage with the collection. There's a couple of things that are notable in your building, and these again relate to the amount of space per item. Much like with the collection, where there's a lot of books per square foot, there's a lot of seats per square foot. Like, it might be more helpful to think of it in terms of there's not many square feet per seat. The crowded nature of the space really, I think, limits the amount of enticement that people will sense when they come through the building and look for a place to sit. So one of the goals of the program is to provide more space per seat, allow people to arrange those seats in ways that provide the interpersonal distance that allows them to maintain a sense of territorial defensibility and an appropriate amount of space focused on user activities compared to what's available now. There's parts of the building that really are fairly comfortable, but there's significant parts of the building, especially in the quieter western ends of the building, where things are packed pretty tightly. Some of that is also true at the lower level in the children's zone, where some of the activity spaces, the active learning, the real play, as well as seating, are packed pretty tightly, almost on top of one another, and the ability to support families and larger groups is limited. So one of the strategies in this program is not necessarily to increase the number of seats, but to provide more space per seat, and thereby make each of those seats more appealing. And that in turn will result in the seats being used more often and for longer periods of time. So your investment in each seat reaps bigger rewards. Talked a little bit in the introduction about the blurring of the lines between reader seat and technology seats. The program tries to identify a series of technology environments, some of which are very conducive to group computing activities. You can get a sense of some of that in these images. And others which are very much more the traditional, I'm focused on a very singular task, and what I really want is quiet and the ability to get support when I needed access to peripherals. And so rather than relying on one or two types of technology space, there's a much broader range, and the ability of the building to support user-provided devices throughout the building. So while it isn't technically about the seat, the distribution of power throughout the building is part of the narrative included with the program document. Activity spaces is one of the things that comes up a lot, and this was also true in the discussions with the staff. The need for more of a small group, either quiet or active activity space, which you see in the upper right-hand corner, to support a pretty wide variety of uses for really a broad range of user ages, is an essential element of the updated program. There's also an emphasis on maker places. You can see that illustrated in the lower right-hand corner. But there's also some of the more traditional spaces, enough space for the youngest of your patrons to find a safe environment and get used to the idea of socialization, of coming to the library with family, and then to engage in collaborative learning in a variety of ways that really support both individual and group learning, mathematical skills, social skills, active learning. And the idea is to improve the range of learning styles that the library can support beyond the traditional verbal skills that are supported by reading. So this is a major component of the updated program. I think you're aware, based on the room that you're sitting in, that the library has experienced limitations in the ability of its meeting venues to support the capacities and the types of events that are desired. The program includes a number of much larger venues to support truly big community scale events, as well as a series of smaller divisible spaces that can support a variety of concurrent activities with truly acoustic dividers that support independent operation of the spaces in parallel. The idea is to make sure that these rooms are flexible enough so that they can support a variety of activities, not just traditional meetings. They can be open to be fairly flexible. They can support exhibits and depending on special events that can really be arranged to support whatever the library happens to need at the time. The program also sets out a goal of hoping that these spaces can be arranged in a way so that those spaces are on paths that encourage discovery of other services, so they can become destinations, and the path from the entry to the meeting venue is actually the opportunity for people who aren't familiar with everything you provide to become familiar with some of those services and resources. And at the same time, to be easy enough to access before and after hours without convoluted pathways through the building before or after normal operating hours. When it comes to the actual design of the building, this will be one of the key elements that defines how flexible and adaptable the space can be made to meet those varying utilization demands. But the program includes a much larger auditorium and then repurposing of the existing auditorium into a multifunctional space that is really focused first on being a makerspace. One of the special spaces that really makes the Urbana Free Library special is the Champaign County Historical Archive. There's a significant amount of space defined that supports both the collection and curation and storage of the materials, as well as the ability of the public to access those materials and learn about those either through research, individual access, or in a group classroom type setting. Those spaces really right now are distributed in a series of spaces that aren't really intended to be archival support in their nature. Better control of temperature and humidity access are essential, and the program identifies both the qualitative as well as the quantitative need to support the current collection, as well as an ongoing program of acquisition and curation. So this is a major improvement in the capabilities of the building if the recommendations of the program are adopted. We did want to acknowledge that the existing building, like many libraries, has made sacrifices in favor of defining public use space and challenging the staff to make do with less. This less is in terms of both actual space and quality of space. This makes sense in a lot of ways, but at a certain point, you have the limit of what the staff can realistically deal with and still be efficient and effective in delivering service to the public. And so we looked at both the public zone and the workgroup zone nature of staff work, thinking first about the nature of the engagement directly with the public, replacing some of the very large and inefficient and almost intimidating contact points. Your circulation desk is a good example, and looking towards something that's much less space intensive, while at the same time promoting better engagement with the public, both in a face-to-face kind of transactional environment, as well as more of a hip-to-hip collaborative kind of environment, depending on where the service points are located. We also wanted to acknowledge that there's a balance between that person-to-person type of interaction and the self-use type of action that occurs within a building. And part of that is the checkout of materials. So the lending functions envisioned in the program incorporate both self-check as well as staffed engagement for lending and account services. And then there is the hope that we can rearrange the existing spaces that are workgroup zones to be more flexible and more conducive to the flow of contemporary work. I think sometimes the fit between what is actually needed out of a workroom and the arrangement of spaces within a particular room has been lost, and the staff is really making do with trying to figure out how to move work through a space that doesn't necessarily support either materials processing or interaction with small groups or engagement with technology. And the arrangement of spaces within the program really tries to support the types of interactions between staff that are needed to be efficient and to position those spaces in proximity to the public zones that those staff work groups serve. It would help with control and visibility and also ease the day-to-day effort needed to provide the service. So there's a lot of work there to address those issues. The last category of space is the sort of behind-the-scenes piece that tries to put in place an allowance that covers all of the things that really aren't occupied by human beings. So these are columns, walls, things like duct shafts, the perimeter wall, anything that really holds the roof up or distributes air, various mechanical systems. This is a drawing through your existing building. Off to the left is the oldest part of the building. Off to the right in the gray areas is a likely expansion zone that will be to the west of the building. And we're trying to show in this diagram that the older the building is, the more the space is congested with those types of structural elements and mechanical spaces that all compartmentalized, relatively inefficient, and hard to adapt spaces. Whereas the right side of the building, a little bit more open, much more in keeping with adaptable, flexible space. And so the challenges of the building as you expand it are mitigated in part by the fact that the newer space will be more efficient than the oldest space. But it's becoming quite a distance to walk from one end of the building to the other. So as part of this program, we've measured all of those things that comprise structural elements, mechanical systems, stairs, elevator shafts, things of that nature, and really tried to apply a series of multipliers that are based on the realities of your existing building where they exist, and then use more contemporary planning standards for any addition. And so we aren't overly skewing this allocation one way or the other. Being overly optimistic or overly pessimistic with this multiplier really does have a significant impact on how the overall space calculation is resolved. I do want to acknowledge that the program does try and make accommodations for some of the challenges described in that list of space deficiencies. Because your elevator is skewed pretty heavily towards the east end of the existing building, and if the building were to be expanded to the west end, it would be a real challenge for users to make the migration from one end to the other and back again to access services. And so we're proposing a second public elevator that could be duplicated, that could also function for staff use. And we're suggesting that one of the ways to get the maximum usable library space out of the existing site is to consider a 4-level expansion rather than 3 levels. There are challenges here in terms of structural capacity in certain areas, zoning limitations on building height, and proximity to property lines. But the assumption here is that because it's an urban environment, this is not an unrealistic approach to trying to get the most out of the existing site. As we go through that process, the thought is that expansion of the building would be, in one case, to the west. And this represents an expansion zone on the ground level, first and second floor. And then we're proposing that the third level be connected to one of the mechanical rooms. We will need some of that for the addition. And then there'll be additional space at that upper level. One of the challenges, of course, is deciding what goes on what level. And there's a suggestion in the program that things that are of a highest use level be closest to the entry level. So first floor would be the space to look for the most active zones. And then the farther away you get from that level, the more focused, the more need for quiet, perhaps the more staff focused those spaces could be. That really is a challenge for the next step in the process. But we wanted to make sure as we were defining an overall space need that we weren't coming up with a number that exceeded a likely capacity of site. You can imagine that in some ways you could try and get control of the entire site, but in terms of pragmatics, both in terms of cost, control, ease of expansion, this is one strategy that might be worth exploration. And this was used as the defining limit for what a practical building size might be. And if we add up all of the space that's likely possible at each of those areas within this addition, we're coming up with something that's just under 90,000 square feet of available space within which to program both the active use space for public and staff and all of those things that support roof, mechanical systems, that sort of thing. The last component, well, yeah, that was the last component in the process. That led us to a series of calculations that we think end up with a total program that accomplishes several things. it's a space allocation that's based on trying to address real-world behaviors that are exhibited by people in buildings. So that notion of marketplace really builds on how people behave in essentially retail settings. We like to browse by looking at what's on the shelf. There's studies been done that suggest that we're not really likely to use a catalog, and we're not really all that likely to engage staff. We like to go and look, judge books by the covers. The space recommendations really do account for that territoriality that we all tend to exhibit. And I think that territoriality has only been enhanced by our pandemic experiences. We're less likely to want to be crowded together, and defining space per individual that allows us to maintain a kind of healthy psychological as well as disease-focused distance and accommodate all the things that we bring with us, be it children or strollers or computers or book bag. Those are good ways to increase the level of use per seat. We've really focused on what makes the library special and providing adequate space for your truly unique collections in the county archives is a big part of this. And so we really try to acknowledge the typical components of what makes the library great, as well as those that are truly special to the Urbana community. Sustainable support spaces, the frustrations of working in a building that fights you at every step of the way. Difficult to enumerate fully. Recruiting, retention, efficiency, maintaining control over staffing costs, all are impacted by the ability of the building to make delivery of service easy. And so the program really does pay attention to the nature of the staff work zones. When we got through the calculations, we tried to balance that 90,000-ish realistic space need with a sense of whether or not that amount of space supported your strategic need. It would be unfortunate to find out that that amount of space really left you deficient in terms of the building's ability to meet service demands within the community. And after assessment with the staff, we do believe that this list of spaces does in fact meet the strategic goals that the library has in terms of serving the community without adding in anything that is not truly essential in terms of those needs. We think there's enough specificity in the program document so that people can take up the next step, and we'll talk about those next steps in a bit. But it's also flexible enough, both in terms of its product, it's an Excel workbook, so that modifications can be made as the process continues. But conceptually, it's built around a series of strategic elements that allow you to adapt the specifics of the plan, and then in fact the building, to meet the ongoing changes that are evident within the library community. So we aren't overly fixated on a specifically narrowly focused technology or approach to delivering service. This is a program that really emphasizes flexibility and the ability to adapt space, both in the near and long term, to meet shifting priorities. The tally of that is that we're coming up with spaces that are increased in just about all of the zones within the building. I've got a diagram in a bit that it's a little easier to read than the table. But the overall building gross square footage is just over that 90,000 square foot target. That's not unduly concerning at this point because refinement will be possible both in the design phase and when we get specific data on the site. Find out where those boundaries are and have discussions with any of the jurisdictions controlling the site. So this is definitely within a margin of error for the process. I do want to point out is that the services that the public engages with are the big beneficiaries of the majority of the increases in area. That entry, lendings, and amenities area is really where a lot of the marketplace orientation, kid-oriented types of activities occur. You can see a substantial increase in the amount of space devoted to the multi-purpose room. This is essentially adding a large 300-person venue to the program. Adult services, this is really the increase in the amount of space per seat and the amount of space between the aisles as well as more of that marketplace collection. You can see an increase in the amount of dedicated teen services space. Teen and adult services are thought of as being paired in the program, but there are allocations for teen-only focused space that creates another type of environment that will support particular interests of a particular age group. Youth services is increased. A lot of that is in the amount of space per seat. And then it also benefits from the amount of space incorporated in the multi-purpose room. The program really looks to identify a closer relationship between the children's services area proper with the existing auditorium, the space here and now, and utilize that in ways that support story time and a variety of specialized events in that space. So programming would be one of those components that overlaps between multi-purpose room and children's services. And then you see the dramatic increase in the historical archive space, part of which is bringing space that's in other buildings into the library proper, and some of that is space that will support growth beyond what the current collections accommodate, as well as classrooms and display space. So you can see some pretty dramatic increases in a pretty significant array of space typologies. One of the things we like to do at the end of the process is step back and make sure that the overall allocation of spaces is as efficient as possible, but in this case also acknowledges the fact that we're working with a lot of legacy structure. Sorry, this is a little out of focus. The happy news here is that the overall use of space for human activity is going up as a percentage of the overall gross area of the building. That's because the additions are getting increasingly more efficient, and we would hope that the same would be true for another expansion. We're also pleased that the overall amount of space that is occupied is primarily for the public. While there are significant increases in the amount of space given over to the staff, the ratio of public space to staff space is actually better than one would find in a lot of buildings, especially at this size. Typical arrangement might be 2/3 to 1/3 staff to public, public to staff. And the overall efficiency of a building, especially with components of this vintage, could be as low as 50% public use, and we're upwards of 56% of the assignable space is public space. So those are pretty good numbers, and it reflects the shift to more contemporary construction approaches. As I mentioned, this is one step in a series of steps to actually get to an improved facility. It's important that this program be investigated with some rigor. I know the staff has put a lot of time into evaluating each of the components, and we've looked at the summary calculations repeatedly and asked ourselves those sanity check kinds of questions. But it's time for this to be vetted by a broader audience. It becomes the basis for all of the next steps. I think everyone's going to have the same sort of questions. Should we expand to the west? Are there other options? Is this the right way to arrange the space within the building? Does that have any impact on our sense of how well the building will function? If we do this, how much will it cost? If it costs that much, how do we find that money? And then how do we convince those funding sources to support us in our efforts? So every step subsequent to this really does hinge on the validity and the acceptance of this as the vision that's appropriate to meeting the service needs of the library within the Urbana community. So that's a lot to take in, but it's simpler than reading through what is a pretty long document. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Joe. Is there any questions from here? 'Cause that is a lot of information.
It's a lot of information. And I know, talk about this a little bit, but we talk about a 4-story expansion and an extra elevator, which would probably be a good thing. But then was there conversation about making a new entrance so that for accessibility, then we would then not need the getting around the stairs problem?
questions tied up in there. The westward expansion is a pretty straightforward, simple idea, and it comes with the challenge of linearity, and I think then a second elevator would definitely make sense. If there were a different way to think about the site, and I don't know, we haven't looked at this, but an L-shaped building might have the potential of creating a more centralized location for a single set of elevators that could connect various levels. That in turn probably introduces other challenges, whereas parking, how do you get from those parking zones into the building? Is that still a single entry? How does that relate to prevailing grade at those locations and the relation between that and the first floor or the ground floor? So it's not a simple answer. And I think in terms of strategic planning, each of those approaches is going to take roughly the same amount of space. So if you want to think about it as a very linear building or an L-shaped building, some type of space is going to have to be allocated either for additional elevators or stairs or lobbies. And to make all of that come together on a sloping site is going to need some type of space.
Okay, thanks.
I wish I could give you a more specific answer, but that really is a next step in the process.
Sure. No.
Or consider design options.
Okay. No, that helps, thank you.
Based off the measurements, the area that we have available to the west, is it feasible that 4-level plan to get roughly 30,000 feet in there? Is that possible with that without having to go southward at all?
That was the premise of that calculation, is how much could we add onto the building without really going any farther south than the current facade, with the entry pavilion being the exception. The calculation really pushes the boundaries. We're assuming we're out to the property line on the north and west, and that we're encroaching a little bit on the existing roof of the most recent addition to connect to that mechanical room. To get to that approximately 90,000 square feet.
Yeah.
We're also assuming that no one's going to want a solid mass of a building, so we're pushing that uppermost level back from the edge a little bit, so we're maintaining a little bit of a cornice balustrade line that ties in with the original form of the building. It won't be pushed back quite as much as the mechanical penthouses now, but I would try to use that same technique to minimize the visual mass of the building.
Right.
Joe, I appreciated your analysis of the staff space to public space ratio. What I didn't see but probably missed is collection space. That's allocated by like the adult collections or the adult space. Is that right?
Right.
And then,
Right.
but slicing the pie a different way, is the collection space, is it designed for growth of the collection or sort of maintenance of the collection size? And I know you are promoting a more open, less dense collection. So I'm just curious about the size of the collection as it's reflected in the new space.
Right. Right now, the calculation supports two approaches. The one we touted in the program is more of the, let's make it easier to browse so that more of your collection is out of the building. And because it's out of the building, you could, in theory, purchase more collection and bring it in to fill some of those empty shelves. And if the model works as it should, you're still going to have the challenge of trying to keep collection brought forward and put in those space out kinds of environments. We've seen some pretty significant increases in circulation across a really wide variety of collections based on that technique. So the approach is really focused on calculating the amount of space needed for a collection of its current size in a way that's presented in a more browser-friendly environment. But because those browser-friendly environments generate more circulation, you can actually accommodate a bigger collection. Yeah.
Sounds like magic, but.
Wish that was a super answer.
Joe, I had sort of a related question, and this may be one of those things where it's not fully figured out yet, or the staff is going to make this decision ultimately, but with the marketplace space, I mean, some of the space is still going to have to be the warehouse kind you're describing. Do you have any kind of estimate on how much of the space will now be allocated to that sort of, like what you call a browser-friendly area versus what we have
I think our
now?
initial calculation is somewhere around 12 to 15% of the collection would be presented in a face-out form. Some of that would literally be in the marketplace. Some of that would be in more of the warehouse zone. Excuse me. We're suggesting that the collection density in that warehouse zone be a little bit less than literally end-to-end books, so that you can take one shelf in each vertical section of a range and do a series of 3 books on one shelf in each of those sections. And that makes the browsing within the denser parts of the collection a little bit more friendly, and it helps you orient where you are and do some of that serendipitous discovery. So it isn't entirely in the marketplace that we're applying those merchandising techniques. Excuse me.
Does the area where the cafe was, is that reutilized?
It is reutilized. There's a space for a rents zone that's really about sale of materials. And then the rest of the building is given over to other uses. So cafe per se in the old sense, that's not part of the current tally.
It was specified in there that this program would not be employing the lead system. I was curious of why that was, why it was.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It was specified in the program that it would not be employing the lead system.
Oh, right. That is an option that the library has. The program is really based on incorporating a number of the underlying principles that guide the LEAD program. One of the frustrations that a number of our clients have expressed is the cost of tracking the progress against LEAD. A number of them have decided that we'll implement the underlying principles but not pay for certification.
Right.
Others have identified certain components only of the rating system and targeted specifics. Sometimes it's indoor environmental quality, sometimes it's renewable or recyclable materials, sometimes it's energy consumption, sometimes it's water use. It can be a combination of all of that. And then others have actually gone through the process of doing the certification and targeting a specific level. It's important to note that the LEAD program really has as a goal the continued advancement of the end target. I don't know if it's really end targeted, but as the energy codes and other processes have really caught up with the aspirations embodied in early editions of LEAD, the goals within current programs have been pushed farther out. And so accomplishing some of the goals established is more difficult than in the past. And so each client really has to get comfortable with the level of effort and investment both in the sustainable concepts and in the documentation and certification process.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois actually has a really good energy efficiency code, and meeting the requirements of that go well beyond what almost any building did even a few years ago. And so the end result of even meeting the energy code is pretty noticeable compared to a typical building of, say, 5 or 10 years ago.
Thank you. Other comments or questions for Joe?
This might be way down the line in the planning process, but I'm just curious. It seems like you have tons of experience doing this with libraries, around similar sizes. How do you sort of go about trying to minimize disruption when do you kind of have a plan in place for in what order you go through to, because I just know we have so many everyday services that are, obviously
Right.
going to be disrupted.
Right. That would definitely have to be part of the design exercise. It impacts your day-to-day life and delivery of service to the community, but it also impacts the time and the cost of construction. And so when you're thinking through the investment that needs to be made, understanding those aspects are important. This is a pretty significant increase in the amount of size proposed. So if actually be working with an addition of this size, it's really conceivable to get the addition constructed and move significant portions of your operation into the addition and then do whatever adjustments are needed within the existing building to tie the addition back into current construction. I think part of the evaluation of which direction to expand and where things get located would take into account how do we minimize kind of the disruption. So I think we probably start from the standpoint of we don't want to move absolutely everything in the building if we don't have to. But we do want to think long-term and be strategic. So if something really should move, let's not lock it into place any more than it is. Let's set ourselves up for, you know, a couple of generations of really successful use and try and weigh that performance against cost of construction, cost of operation, and see where the best balance really lies. Right. Disruption, no one loves those days.
Unavoidable though, I'm sure. Thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else, Joe, I just want to say thank you again very much for your time here tonight and walking us through it. There's a lot to take in there, and it was a it was a great summary thereof.
If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.
Sure.
All right. I know we still have a lot more to get through, but of course, those were very important things to hear out and have said.
Could I also thank
Yes.
Dawn again and
Of
Rachel who were
course.
here, the amount of time. Ron Robertson is no longer with us, but I don't know how many weeks Dawn has spent working on the building, months, on the building program. And Rachel, there's a fair number of things that you've done. I've spent some time, so it's an incredible task to get it to the place where you have it. And it's what we come up with, what you vote on next month, hopefully, is going to really serve our community well.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. All
So
right.
next month, do we see the actual plan?
There's no drawings yet.
Okay, no.
It's all on the text. So once you decide that the words and the spaces as allocated are what you as a board want us to move forward with, then we can move ahead with what the next steps might be, like working with the architecture firm or hiring a new architect and developing the plans. Yep. Good questions. I know we all want to design.
I know. How are they going to get all that in that little bit of space? I wanna see it.
And
It
if
seems
it-
as, I'm sorry, go ahead. It seems as though the general, because I know that, you know, there's discussion of expanding, and if that doesn't work out, then finding a new space, but I know that location is so important in Urbana, so that's, it seems like as we're gonna do what we can to stay in place, is what everybody wants to do, staff-wise, I mean.
That is a board decision to make. Ultimately, you own the land. As a board, you own the land, you own the building. There's no debt on this building, so that is your call.
No pressure.
And my question is about the likelihood of funding. So he presented the first division and then the funding, but do we have a sense that we will probably get funding for it? Is that based historically, or is this wishful thinking, or where does it fall in that sort of,
There
how
is
certain we are?
there is a huge fundraising effort that would, of course, have to take place for this, and that was actually just beginning to broach that subject at the last foundation board meeting, asking about how that occurred for the last expansion and what type of steps would have to take place in order to raise that type of capital. So yeah, it's not something that is there now, but yes, there is a massive campaign that would have to gear back up to make this happen.
But the historical sense is that those campaigns happen and are successful, I assume?
We've managed to do it before.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
There's a few disciplines
Yeah,
of that.
yes, yes.
We can give you some ideas.
All right. Yeah, we can, of course, talk more about that as we get closer to it down the line, but sorry, for the sake of moving this to the next step, 6.3, we have the introduction of Pat, our new collections manager. Or, sorry, Archives, not collections.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you all. I'm Pat Gann. I'll probably keep this shorter than the last agenda item. But yeah, I'm Pat Kane, Central Illinois native. My family grew up in Rantoul, Illinois. Both grandparents came to this area by way of Schnute Air Force Base, and then called this area home. Prior to coming here, I worked with the County Forest Preserve District in the Museum and Education Department, mostly working at the Museum of the Grand Prairie in Muhammad as the Public Programs Manager. Before that, I was a high school history and social studies teacher near near Springfield in Riverton, Illinois. And yeah, very happy to be here. Also just wanted to commend Celeste, Rachel, and Dawn for the culture they've created here, because every single person I've interacted with so far has been insanely helpful, insanely welcoming, and the onboarding process has been very, very smooth, so I just wanted to recognize that as well. So thank you, but very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're happy to have you here. And we will be happy to have a collections manager once we have that too. Sorry, jumped the gun on that one. All right, Celeste, you were going to tell us about the budgeting process?
I am. It's awesome.
I have to say that, get the energy.
I will make this speedy as well, but there are, oops, let's see.
We're following you.
Hello. Let's just log out of Zoom. And Becky, is it on the desktop? My presentation? Okay. Is your email open?
I don't know what else Sean did, but, because we're not friends with Zoom, so I don't know at this point for sure.
No one look at Becky's email.
Okay.
It's actually not a first.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually maybe not good.
That'd be helpful.
Okay, so. He's got it so that it's got two, oh wait, PC, let's try either duplicate or PC screen only. So it's not that one. Yes! The great success. So since a number of you have not been through the budgeting process, I thought it would be helpful to go through it together. Plus, we do this every year, even if you are super familiar with it. Because it's a multi-step process, we want to make sure that we feel good about what's coming, you know, what to expect when. So we'll do this together. So the fiscal 25 budget planning process. Here is the timeline. I'm going to email this all to you so you have it. So you're welcome to take notes, of course, but know that I will send this to you later today. So here are some of the high points. Rachel is working with our management team on our request to the foundation. As I think we mentioned before, and as we just talked about, we want to make sure that the foundation has a nice, healthy fund balance so that we do move ahead in whatever process to expand, renovate the building. They've got funds to at least start with that, if there need to be matching grants or whatnot. And as we go to donors and say, well, look, we've already been saving this much, that's powerful to show the commitment that the foundation already has. So we are going to be asking for fewer dollars for some project work at the library so that they can build up a larger fund balance. And that was a recommendation that Kirsten had made, and we in the foundation thought that was a smart one to follow. So we have a draft grant request going to the foundation board, which they will approve or not in February. And then in March, we will bring you our draft budget. It is a multi-page document that I will show you very quickly on the website. We have a page on your right to know that has all the different financials, and so that whenever you want to take a look back at prior years, you can see what kinds of things have been included, and when you have questions, please let us know about that. So that will be a draft budget to the board in March, and then in April, there's usually some type of revision between what we've shown you. Maybe some questions come up. Maybe the city changes a number for some reason. Maybe there's more revenue coming in that we find out about, which is always fabulous to learn that. So then we will bring you some type of revised budget in April, which we need you to approve so that the library's budget can be included in the city's budgeting process. So state law has you, the library board, responsible for the library's budget. The city council doesn't approve the budget, it includes it and incorporates it in their budgeting process, but you have to approve it first or they can't include it. So in May, they will be voting on their budget, so we need to be done in April so they can go into the packet and work through their process as well. So in prior years, we have been more like, instead of March, April, it's been more an April, May approval process, so sometimes even a May, June, depending on what's happening in city council, but for their own purposes, they're moving their timeline up, so we're moving our timeline up as well. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Oops. So as a reminder, the library has multiple funds. We have the 802, which is the general fund, and you see these in that weekly report that Becky does, and you get the most current one in the board packet. The 802 is the general fund, so that's where the collections and the staffing and paying for the energy bills comes from. We have the 803, which is the library's special reserve fund. This is the special kind of fund that libraries can have to be able to save money for bigger projects. And it can be only used for certain kinds of things like capital expenses or IT or furnishings or finishing off capital expense, basically. So we put money aside every year, not as much as we would like, but we have been putting money aside yearly so that when we have big projects, it is there for us. So that is something that we transfer money into, or we transfer money from 803s back into the regular 802 general fund budget.
Something like an air handler?
Like that.
Something like an air handler?
Yes. But we do not have enough in there for an air handler. That is fund balance. The 810s are the library trust funds. There are basically tiny bank accounts set up in one big bank account for our special projects, like the fairy tale ball has its own account, or adult services, general, admin, general, staff appreciation. So there are over 40 different mini accounts. We share them with you at the highest level, generally adult stuff, children's stuff, archive stuff. So that's money that if it is unspent one year, it stays in those own little mini bank accounts, so to speak. Whereas in the general fund, if items aren't spent, they go into the general fund. And then we have the library building fund, which for many years had been what we were using to run the leased building that we had across the street. And this is the last year that it will exist because there was just a few $1,000s left and we are transferring that money out into the general fund to spend it. So next year, unless we use those line numbers for something else, there won't be a building fund. Like that could be the number fund that we use to start raising money and doing stuff for new building potentially, or the city gives us a new number in the system. We'll see. But it is very possible there will be nothing in the 820 lines next year. So different resources that we use is we develop the plan. Of course, we look at the plans that you have approved as a board, the strategic plan, the technology plan. The city of Urbana does an update to the financial forecast every year, so this is a hot link if you want to take a look. It's their board packet, it's their city council packet. So the financial forecast starts at page 5 if you want to take a look at that. We have our very favorite book in the world, Serving Our Public, Standards for Public Libraries in Illinois. And there are a couple of pieces in there that are standards that have to do with budgets. And we look at those every year when we do budget. So one thing to consider is that up to 60% should be spent on staff total budget. And then with salaries plus fringes, it's a higher number. And so for us last year, staff wages accounted for 54%, but 60 is the recommended cap. And then fringe benefits were an extra 14%, which brought us to a total of 68%, which was under the limit, right around the limit of what the standards recommends. We're right on target. We also look at usage data and trends. So for example, we've seen over the past so many years, electronic downloadables have really increased. And looking at the trends and following up on those impacts other parts of the library. So for example, the more people were checking out ebooks, the fewer fine revenues came in because there are no fines on ebooks. They return themselves, they can't be overdue. That also means that we're not touching physical items. And right now, it's 18, if you look in the statistics, I think it was 18 or 19% of our circulation are these electronic items. And so staff don't have to shelve them, they don't have to check them out, they don't have to process them in or out of the collection except for some high-level cataloging kinds of things. But what we also know is we have library of things items, which take a whole lot longer than a book or a CD or a DVD process. So we evaluate looking at collection trends and the use of how many people are coming to which kinds of programs as we determine where the money needs to go on staffing. And when we were seeing a big trend towards the electronic downloadables, we did pull back in staffing for some departments, or we didn't increase where we might have for acquisitions, for example, because the trend we could see is we would be buying fewer books. Then what happens is book prices drop or CD prices drop, and then Joel can't spend all the CD money because it's more money than we need to buy the collection of CDs than our community actually wants. So in good faith, we create a budget, you approve it, and then as the year goes by, we work with the changing circumstances that we have. And here's an example of the other number that's in the standards. This has to do with collections. So we are supposed to spend, as a public library, 8 to 12% on collections, but there are two ways in writ large that you can spend money on collections. You can look just at the number of physical dollars spent on items, or, and some libraries do that, but other libraries look more broadly, and the rules don't say you have to go one way or the other. We have a department of amazing people that stamp and sticker and put our items in the collection and bring them out. Other libraries outsource all that work. So when they get a bill for a book, the bill at the bottom includes the physical items, but it also includes that staff time of this outsourced group. So they include all that when they look at their numbers. So we figure out our math two different ways. We look at the physical items, which comes in right at 12%, which is the higher number of the 8 to 12. But also, if you look at the other things that we could be counting that other libraries do, for example, what it costs to participate in interlibrary loan. That's part of making a collection available. We're up at 25%. So one way or the other that you look at it, we are definitely meeting that standard. And this, and then the other information I told you out loud about staffing is included in the memo that you'll get that talks about the budget. So we will every year relay these out so that way you know and you're being told that we meet the standards. And if we don't meet the standards, that we are striving towards them and what we're doing to get there.
So Les, is the standard desired maximum or desired minimum? Or is it different for categories?
It's a range, 8 to 12%.
Yeah, okay.
Because some libraries have
Sure.
$14 million budgets. And I've talked to some of those library directors, they say we just can't spend that much money on collections. The desire is high to check things out, but there's not that much desire.
Sure.
Although I've talked to some libraries that have drone collections, so I guess there are ways. These are two places on, you're right to know that if you wanted to dive deep a little bit, Lee, the planning document, strategic plan, financial plan, which is super old, and one day we will retire that, but we have not yet. And then the tech plan will be updated if you approve it today. And then the financial reports. So I'm gonna try not to trip this step over here. So you can see that all the different parts get added to the website as the year goes by. So we've got the wage scale, which shows you how much people get paid at which step and which pay grade, different budget amendments, the compensation report, which is something that we have to provide to the public because we participate in IMRF. So all of these different parts here will come to you in the budgeting process. And then as the years goes by and you approve those different budget amendments, they're put on the website as well. So if you or the community member or staff want to see where things are, it's easier to come here. They're all included in the director's reports also. So if people want to go back that way, they can do it as well. So since we're just now in January, there'll be a 24, 25 coming up as we work on this budget process together. And that's a place that you can go to look at what's available. And that is it. So it wasn't super short, but it wasn't, I hope so.
Perfectly. Thank you, Celeste. All right. That will move us along to our Action items, first up with the consent agenda. Is there any request to separate items? Hearing none, do I have a motion for the? We've got Rob
I'll second.
and Beth. You get next, Glenn. I will go ahead and read through that in full. So our action items include, or sorry, for our consent agenda includes the board meeting minutes of December 12th, 2023, payroll for December 15th, 2023, totaling $122,304.36. Payroll for December 29th, 2023, totaling $108,292.91. Bills for December 15th, 2023, totaling $23,195.26. Bills for December 21st, 2023, totaling $6,531.44. And bills for January 4th, 2024, totaling $35,530.82. Any discussion on those items? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. 8.1, acceptance of the library audit report. Do we have a motion?
I move that we accept. the
That
audit
was your
report.
cue, yes, Glenn.
Sorry to be slow on the uptake.
A second?
Second.
Liz? All right, any discussion on the audit report? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And audit report is passed. 8.2, adoption of the technology plan. Do we have a motion?
I move that we adopt the technology plan.
Beth? And a second?
Second.
All right, Erica, any discussion on technology plan? I think Leon covered it good last month, so everyone's all set on that. All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, so adopted. 8.3, Resolution 2024-01 to accept grants and gifts. This was mentioned in the packet. Do we have a motion for our very first resolution of the year?
Moved.
Erica and Rob, thank you so much. Any discussion on the acceptance of grants and gifts? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. People like to accept money. All right. FY24 budget amendment. That was fairly minor shift of a few funds there from one place to the other. Do we have a motion for the amendment?
So moved.
Beth, and a second.
Seconded.
And Glenn. Any discussion on those? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And budget amendment passed. This next one, if you guys didn't know already, Mark will be stepping down. We will be looking for another board member to fill his spot. So our second resolution of the year is thanking Mark for his time of service. Do we have a motion for that?
I move to
Glenn?
thank Mark.
And a second?
Seconded.
And Rob. And I'm going to go ahead and read through that resolution for Mark. This is resolution number 2024-02, resolution to thank Mark Pelmore for his years of service. Whereas Mark Pelmore has been a trustee of the library board of the Urbana Free Library since November 2020, has been secretary since September 2023, and whereas during his tenure, the Urbana Free Library incorporated equity, diversity, and inclusion language into library policies and procedures, implemented the automatic renewal of materials, created the News Gazette clippings Omeka site, restructured the library to a front of house, back of house model, approved a 2023 to 2026 strategic plan, began a building program process, and whereas the library supported its community and staff during the COVID-19 pandemic by providing new patron services like curbside pickup, e-library cards, book bundles, and take and make craft kits, holding a virtual fairy tale ball, increasing staff benefits, including paid COVID-19 leave, paid sick leave for hourly employees, providing on-site COVID testing for staff, and whereas the library has deepened relationships with other community organizations to serve Urbana residents by amending the IGA with the Urbana School District number 116 to allow students to use their school IDs to check out library materials, partnering with the Cunningham Township Supervisor's Office to offer library cards to people Township has vetted as being without a home while residing in Urbana, partnering with the City of Urbana Arts Grant and Cunningham Township to create murals on the sides of the Township building. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Urbana Free Library Board of Trustees, Urbana, Illinois as follows. Section 1, recognition and thanks. The Board of Trustees hereby recognizes and sincerely thanks Mark Pelmore for his years of service to the Urbana Free Library and its residents as a Board of Trustees member. Section 2, notification of resolution. The board hereby directs that a signed copy of this resolution be presented to Mark. Adopted by the Board of Trustees at this regular meeting thereof, held the 9th day of January 20th, 2024. And we already have a motion, as I recall, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And approved. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time of service here. And moving right along, 2 left. Our third resolution of the year to authorize designated persons to secure and have access to safe deposit boxes at Busey Bank, which seems like something that they would need to do. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
All right, Liz, and a second?
Seconded.
And Glenn. Any discussion thereof? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Adopted. Man, people are motivated to move along. It's like we've been here a little while already. And our last important vote of the evening, to fill those vacant officer positions. So we have volunteering from Erica to shift over from pro tem to the secretary treasurer position, and from Glenn, we will spell your name correctly, I assure you, to the secretary pro tem position. Is there a motion to fill those vacancies with these 2 fine individuals?
So moved.
Now second?
Rob and Beth. Any discussion?
Are there anyone from the floor who would like to nominate themselves or someone else?
Everyone's very happy with these choices. All right. In that case, all in favor of Erica becoming our new secretary treasurer and Glenn becoming the secretary pro tem, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, you are hereby appointed to your new positions. Congratulations. On to Rob's discussion item on streaming and ebook services.
This is a hard time slot to be in for a presentation.
We have full confidence.
I'm going to try to go with Celeste's philosophy of not too short, not too long, and probably more on the side of short. But man, this is a deep topic. And you can describe, of course, the same thing a couple of different ways. I've gone ahead and called it on-demand services. Celeste has called it downloadables, and often that's the way it's described. I've seen so far in our internal documents for staff. It could be streaming, whatever. So whatever you want to call this, it's digital stuff, right? And if you go to our webpage, the library, of course, and you check out, I was just here, wasn't I? Anything under ebooks and more, right? So whatever you get here, ebooks, audiobooks, which in my presentation I've called e-audiobooks because at one time they were on tape and compact disc, movies, TV shows, music magazines. Most of us are familiar with being able to obtain these things from commercial vendors like Netflix, HBO, and of course the library offers so many of these services to its patrons as well. Before we get started, I did want to thank Dawn and Rachel, and please correct me since I've never met Kasia? Cassia. Okay, you told me this last month, but then the holidays happened. Kasia was great and provide this wonderful report, and a lot of what I've got to talk about tonight is based on that. The main services that are available here at the Urbana Library that provide this digital content are Libby, Hoopla, and Canopy. So Libby and Canopy are both owned by the parent company Overdrive, which until recently had its own separate Overdrive application. And then I think mid-2020, Overdrive purchased Canopy from whatever the owner was previously. And Overdrive itself is presently owned by a private equity firm. So among the services that we get from those two service names, ebooks, audiobooks, and magazines from Libby, and Canopy is more of a video delivery service, so movies, TV series, documentaries. And then of course we also have Hoopla, which is a completely separate vendor, which is owned by Midwest Tape. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this until I started checking this out, but I think both companies are based in Ohio. So Overdrive is in Cincinnati, and Midwest Tape is based on a suburb of Toledo. Anyway, so they also offer ebooks, audiobooks, a little bit of streaming video, and a fair amount of streaming music as well. These numbers have been kind of coming up here and there in earlier elements of tonight's meeting as well, but about every month it seems like we have 57,000 or so items that circulate, according to the numbers that Cassie provided me. And of those, about 10,000 of those are digital items that come from one of those, usually one of those three vendors. So that's about 20%. That number has been rising, actually, so I just kind of did a visual average of that over the last 18 months or so. It looks like going from the early summer of 22, every month we had about 8,000, 9,000 usages of items in digital circulation. And then in very recent months, it's been closer to like 12, 13,000. So it's obviously rising. Libby content is the most circulated of this and makes up probably the bulk of the monthly checkouts. Of course, that again comprises books, audio books. Those are kind of the big ones there. Hoopla has a pretty good chunk as well, but it looks quite a bit smaller compared to Libby's content. From what I'm understanding, about $120,000 or so is the annual budget roughly for all of these services. And that kind of breaks down to roughly $2 per use for Hoopla and Canopy. Hoopla, it's kind of a weird deal where we've basically told Hoopla in our configuration that we don't want to spend more than $5,500 every month. And so that may have other implications. If the service is busier than usual, some patrons may get shut out. And if you've ever encountered a message from Hoopla like, sorry, too many people have checked things out today, wait until after midnight, that's what that's about. Mm-hmm. So again, that kind of ties into this growing popularity, right? As more and more of our patrons are using these services, we're hitting that cap more often, it seems to me, especially from the numbers, again, that Cassie had provided me. Roughly $1,100 a month for Canopy on average, and the way they've been doing their accounting with usage is it's a new system they're doing involving tickets. Real weird. I haven't figured out how this works with like TV series yet. And then for Libby content, it's about $3,500 or so that it kind of breaks down to that. From what Cassie had told me, that's roughly, as far as we can tell, it's about 50 cents per item. Here at the Urbana Free Library, we also have some numbers to provide you for unique monthly users versus new users, and some of the trends that I was seeing in the document Cassia compiled for me were kind of interesting. So it seems like it's pretty consistent on all of these services in terms of how many unique users month to month, how many new users month to month. So there must be like a fairly consistent thing where people use it once, may not come back to it immediately or ever, but that's kind of churning, and then there's this faithful base of users that come back again and again and Canopy has the smallest number of unique users every month here at Urbana Free Library. Any questions so far? I thought this was kind of fascinating stuff, honestly.
I'm actually
And that's
shocked
one
that
thing about
Canopy's
digital
so low.
services is it's a little harder, it's more of a black box. This is true of the commercial products too, right? Netflix, you kind of wonder, how do they know if it's worthwhile investing in a new show? As far as advantages and disadvantages of these technologies and offering them to patrons, and of course for the library as a whole, I would say, I've called this dynamic holdings, right? Where since this is effectively an externally curated collection of items from each of these services, there's kind of a constant revolving door of content. And Celeste, I think you alluded earlier to when libraries buy physical items to their collection, sometimes that's also curated by somebody else. So it's kind of the same idea here, where that's reducing some of the workload on the acquisition side of things, because it's being curated externally. Kasia did mention in the document that she sent me in some of her notes that very often a way we use these services is if there's something that's a mass market author, some book that's really, really popular, and we see there's a lot of holds on an item, that we can actually effectively license additional copies of that item for a short period of time. So I call that infinite supply of in-demand items at a cost. Right? So there is a substantial cost to doing that, but probably less substantial than buying a whole bunch of copies of that book and then having to divest ourselves of that when no one cares about it anymore. And of course, convenience for patrons, kind of goes without saying. But there are some other disadvantages to things like this too. And again, I think these are all kind of familiar disadvantages for all of us, because we've all had to use Netflix. And, oh, I was watching this show and now it's going away on February 28th or whatever. I guess it's a leap year, 29th. So holdings, ephemerality, like stuff can come and go from these services. And I've probably unfairly described this as library holdings now become tied to a service's whims. It's way more complicated than that. So, I can't even imagine what it's like working one of these services and having to constantly renegotiate things with publishing houses, with content providers, with Hollywood studios. It's just gonna be a constant whack-a-mole sort of thing going on, but the end result of that is if something disappears from a service, it's no longer in our library collection and no longer available to patrons. There is also the doomsday scenario of one of these companies could just disappear overnight, and then suddenly, boom, anything we have in the collection, we no longer can offer to patrons. But in talking to staff, I think the biggest disadvantage is that the cost of these services is becoming very high because, again, don't want to describe this too pessimistically, but they kind of have us over a bucket a little bit in the sense that much of our collection and a growing bit of our collection is being offered through these services. They know we want to keep them, right? Because now we have been using them for long enough, and that's true of all libraries, not just public libraries either, but also academic libraries. I also put on some patrons prefer actual printed books. I'm sure that there are complaints every now and again about, I see you have this on Libby or Hoopla, but darn it, where's the print copy? But at least we have some form of it to offer. If it behooves you, talk to your Illinois legislator, because we are a fairly populous state. We have a little bit of purchasing power. I think it would be great to see state legislatures start talking about capping the cost of these services. There are some price controls on these things. Because again, they can kind of renegotiate price of subscriptions and things as they see fit right now. And all Illinois library patrons kind of suffer for that. So I just kind of threw that in as my final slide for y'all. If you do happen to know any legislators or just want to speak to one or write them and say, hey, this might be something good to look into for all of Illinois public libraries, it might benefit people on a national level. Okay, is there any questions?
I hesitate to open a can of worms because having done library licensing before. I'm curious about the pricing model. Is it by the drink with a cap? Do we pay for every use? Are any of these perpetual licenses, or they're all leases? How do I suspect they will operate differently, but is there a summary that you can give?
It's a little bit of,
Yeah.
I'm new to the collections world, and Rachel's been dealing with it
Yeah,
for a lot longer.
It's a both and situation. So one of the changes that we've seen in library collection purchasing is moving from purchasing a perpetual license or a certain number of circulations per digital item to a leasing model where the item expires after a certain period of time, right? Which means that as a result, whether an item circulates or not, the library is forced to either rebuy or lose the item from the collection after, let's say, 24 months. And so the costs for these services continues to rise as a result. But I would say it's a both and. So with Hoopla, it's a cost per circ model, which is where it averages about $2 a circ. Canopy is a very similar model, whereas Libby, you pay to have the content regardless of whether it circs or not. Right, so it's a combination of a little bit of everything.
Thank you.
Is Libby the only game in the country, basically, that does that?
I'm sorry, say that
Is
again?
Libby the only choice? Like, there's no competitive?
There are competitors. So Access 360 is a competitor that's offered by Baker and Taylor. That being said, Libby is by far the most advantageous option for the Urbana Free Library and many libraries in Illinois. There's a consortium called the
ECC.
It used to be ECC. It's now the Digital Public Library of Illinois, I believe. Consortium where we all go in so that our purchasing power is greater collectively than it ever would be individually. And that consortium allows us to share those e-titles across libraries, making Libby by far the best choice for us as a library.
Rachel, since you brought up the consortium, you kind of mentioned something to me about the impracticability if that consortium did exist where Libby is concerned. That had the library looked in the past into not participating? I mean, I don't know how long the consortium has been around. Is there any risk to that consortium at this time?
I would say that the consortium is very stable. There are many libraries throughout the state that participate, and so I would consider it a stable choice for us to participate. We could certainly opt out at any point in time, but again, we would the number of titles that we would be able to provide access to patrons would be significantly diminished if we opted to remove ourselves from the consortium. So that is not something that our library has interest in at this
I
time.
know that's not being considered. I just kind of wondered, since you had mentioned that's kind of the thing that makes this tick and makes it an option for us. So I just didn't know if there were any variables or moving pieces on that going forward.
Thankfully, a very well-run consortium, so we appreciate that, and stronger as the years go on.
And Overdrive isn't like fighting the fact that it exists or anything. They're not refusing to negotiate or threatening to change their terms or anything.
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Yeah, I don't know how many are in that consortium specifically, but there's over 600 libraries in the state, so we've got to have, some degree of power there and leveraging that number.
When you log into Digital Library of Illinois, there we go, it's finally come to me. When you log into Digital Library of Illinois, you'll have the option to select your library. That, in essence, is giving you the list of all the libraries that are participating in the consortium. So if you'd like to get a sense of how many there are, that's where you can do it.
Any other questions or comments for Rob? Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. It's great information, and I know I've used all three of those services, so I appreciate they exist, even though if it's going to be a book, it's going to be in print, but
I would prefer that myself.
if it's a road trip, Libby is indispensable.
Yeah, it's. I was just listening to books this weekend when I was making some drive to some random place to do a crisis deal. So yeah, it's useful stuff.
All right. Winding down to our last couple things here, reports for liaison officers. Anything from the Friends?
The Friends have not met since the last sale, so nothing to report.
Everybody's wiped out from that. I get it. It's a lot of work.
They were building it up, and I was like, how crazy can it be? And it was a little crazy. The first hour, so I was in the counting, I don't know what they call it, I was counting all the books of the
And the
booksellers.
counting out your money?
It was a lot. I did more math than I've done in a long time.
All right. For the foundation, when we last met, their update on their recent fundraising They are, as of January 3rd, at 49,000 for the year. That's exactly 49% of the way to their $100,000 goal. So it's a nice even number. It makes it pretty easy to figure out our percentages there. But that's humming along. That seems to be going pretty good this year. As Celeste mentioned, the foundation will be reviewing the grants request in the upcoming meetings, and once that gets kicked back, then we can approve that. Well, it'll go into the budget overall request, and then we can approve that. And the foundation recently took on 2 new board members, so steadily building up their numbers. We still have 2 vacancies remaining, so if you know anybody, maybe show them in that direction. And I think that was it. The only other thing, there's been talk for quite a while, they wanting to do like a big in-person strategic planning session that has gotten delayed until we have a new Kirsten, basically. All right. Bringing us to IHLS. Anything from them, Rob?
Again, just reminding everybody that Member Day is in less than a month-ish, February 8th. I think it's too late to get a free coffee or whatever with Early Bird, but you can still register, I think, up until the day of. So that is before our next meeting, so it's your last warning. The only other thing I have is the automated material handler system. There was something that went out in one of the member newsletters. It's a more detailed look into some of the decisions that IHLS is making about that system. So if you are interested in that, let me know. I'll show you where that is. I didn't have time to make a short URL, but yeah, it's out there and kind of interesting. So, that's all I got.
I have a question for you, Rob. I duly registered for Member Day, but I could not figure out whether there's an in-person component, and if
There is
so,
not.
where it is. 100% online.
As far as I know, it is 100% online, which again, I'm still a little mystified about how this free hot drink is down.
That was the big mystery.
But, yeah, I was gonna say, there might be like a really crazy DoorDash operation going on we don't know about.
All right. Any administrative reports?
Just a quick update, we did receive the next version of the contract for the city, the township, and the library for the use of the 2 corner lots. So that came in yesterday or today. I'll be looking that over and hopefully moving that ahead.
All right. I do not believe there are any board or committee reports.
Oh,
I stand corrected.
so let's just asked if I would mention my son and his first Lego League team at Countryside School did for their innovation project, Little Free Libraries, and they talked to Celeste about it, as well as the National Director of Little Free Libraries. And their innovation idea was to create a catalog system for scanning in and scanning out books in Little Free Libraries so that you could look online before going to the Little Free Library and know what was in there. And so at the first round of Lego League, and my husband is the coach, and this is like a huge deal. I had no idea. It's Lego robotics. So they do a little robot, and then they have their innovation project. And so at the first round of competition, which was here at on the engineering campus, they came in first in innovation project. So they
Great
got to
idea.
the next level with their Little Free Libraries. So much thanks to Celeste. Giovanni says all the time, she's very nice.
You didn't tell them that all librarians are nice. You just say, ours is the nicest.
I'm familiar with the Lego robotics competition here locally, but I didn't know about the innovation side of it. I really like that idea. For President Report, I would just mention 2 things. Well, I guess one is a mention and the other is an ask. Harkening back to the comment about the foundation's fundraising, of course, everyone here is welcome to do so. I actually have my check in my bag that I need to drop off. I know it has been mentioned to me that they would love to be able to say that everybody on the board is a donor to the foundation, and it doesn't matter how big or how small. It doesn't matter if it's just a change in your pocket, to be able to say that everyone here is. So if people are not already, if you would please consider doing so. And then my last pitch is, if there was somebody to step into Rob's shoes for next month and do a board education talk.
For clarity's sake, you don't need to wear my shoes.
Although, I mean, they'll probably.
They're nice shoes.
They'll probably fit. Anybody? Or March in the future, you can always think of it out there. I'll
I can
send.
do February.
We have a February, thank you. I will send something out though to see if anybody interested in future ones as well.
Do you choose
Try
your
to.
topic? That's my
Yes.
anxiety.
On the website, there's a list
Okay,
of
great.
suggested topics.
There is. I can
I may venture forth next time.
show you that. I'll send it out so
Okay, thanks.
you can say. But yeah, I have run to the end of my list of volunteers for that, so I need to start a new list for 2024. So thank you very much, Liz, for February's. Any new or unfinished business before we wrap it up? Hearing none, I don't think this will be too hard. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Erica?
Seconded. Oh.
We'll give it to Glenn. All right. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you.